Glenn, where'd y'all put the coffee, man? All right, our next speaker is a fantastic biblical scholar. He is a professor of biblical studies. He's an awesome man of God. He's a fantastic brother. He's got a heart to just serve and make a difference. He's going to love on each and every one of you. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Mr. Bob Ross. Let's hear it.
I want to give a shout out for Glenn Shavers, who's been a great encouragement to me. And by the way, I was just taking a few minutes reading one of Petrocelli's books, which gave me a lift, encouraged me to get up here and kind of overcome my shakes to talk to you guys today. I hope my voice holds up. It's great to be with you. I appreciate this opportunity, consider it a real opportunity and a privilege and an honor. But it's always an honor when God uses us. You ever think about that? It doesn't matter how He's using you. Whether it's just a word of encouragement or you're washing dishes or washing somebody's feet or whatever you're doing. It's a blessing to be considered a servant of God. There's no greater honor than any of us can ever have than for God to take us and use us in some way, and He will, if you're ready, if you're willing. So it's great to be here. I'll start with a little bit of my story. I don't have quite the story of Bobby, but I do have something very similar to share with you, and I suspect that it may be very similar to something that all of us have experienced at one time. I grew up in a very strong church-going family. My father was Southern Baptist. My mother went to the Non-Instrument Church of Christ up in Tennessee. And if you know much about the church history, you know both of those were very conservative churches. And the Churches of Christ, well, let's just say they were a little exclusivistic. And my mother didn't really consider my daddy a Christian, not when I was a child. They went to different churches. That later changed. There was a little different attitude about that. But anyway, I remember many hellfire and brimstone sermons. When you're a child, you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and you hear these hellfire and brimstone sermons, you really take it to heart. And I can remember going to bed at night, afraid that I would die in my sleep and wake up in hell. And so when I was 10 years old, I decided I needed to be baptized. And so I went forward in my childlike faith, and that kind of faith is okay. I did believe in Jesus. Very childlike, very immature, but that didn't make any difference. Just because later on I got all kinds of theological education, that did not make my faith any better with God. Does that make sense? Yeah. Doesn't make, that's not the way, the little 2-month-old baby, the little 1-week-old baby who nurses at mother's breast, who clings to mother, who trusts mother. Her faith, the faith of that little baby is just as good as the faith of the 18-year-old woman who says, I trust my parents, who knows a lot more about what it means to trust people. But you see, it doesn't have to do with how much you know. It has to do with how willing you are just to lean on God. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But anyway, that was my environment. And for a long time, I've heard people say they wish they didn't believe it. They wish they could not. They would like to believe in God. Some agnostics and atheists say, it's just, but there's too much evidence and science and so forth. But it would really be nice if I could just believe in God. I think that would be very comforting. My problem was, it was not comforting to believe in God. Not at all. And I always wished that I could disbelieve. I thought how nice it would be if there were no God. And then I could just live my life and I could be who I wanted to be. And I don't have to worry about whether God's going to send me to hell or not. And then I I was about, I don't know, maybe it was 15, 16 years old. I belonged to a hiking club in my high school. And I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we often took trips up to the Smoky Mountains with our hiking club to hike. And a bunch of kids got together that day. We didn't have an adult sponsor with us, but we rented a truck, filled the truck up with some hay. People just got in the back of the truck to ride up to the mountains on a March day. Well, when you get up to 6,000 feet, the temperature can go down. And it turned out, before we got back, it started raining. And I was with a group of 2 other classmates. And we started back from where we were hiking to a place called Siler's Ball. Ball in the mountains is a place where just kind of grass grows. There's no trees or bushes. And we had hiked out there and to see it, and we were hiking back. And we thought something went wrong because the time had gone by. Enough time had gone by that we should have gotten back to the parking lot where our truck was parked. And it got dark. And we realized that we were lost. And it was raining. And we were out in the mountains. And I was getting cold. Hypothermia obviously was beginning to set in. Temperature in the 40s. And no decent rainwear. We were in dire straits. And I really thought probably I might die. It was a terrifying situation. And at some point, though, in that night, before we finally did get out, right? I'm still here. But at some point, I do not know why, I cannot explain it. But I had the realization that I didn't matter to God, that God loved me, that He cared for me, that He could forgive me, that He accepted me. And a great peace just kind of came over my heart. It was what I call an experience of the grace of God that I have always had ever since. And that feeling that I wish there were no God, that never came back again. Because it was so wonderful. It was so wonderful to know there is a God. The God who loves me and cares for me. And that's been the experience of my heart and soul, thank God, since that time. How long ago's that been? I'm 87 now. 16, 87, whatever that is. That's a long time. Well, we've got a theme of our conference here, trust and obey. I thought, Glenn, when we talked about this, or after we decided on this, that's not a very sexy theme, is it? You know, it's not really eye-grabbing, kind of old-fashioned. Trust and obey. And then the first thing that I thought about that was that it sounds like we're going to get together and just kind of hammer you guys. Look, you need to trust God. You need to trust God and you need to obey God. You need to trust and you need to obey. And I don't think that's really what you guys need to hear. You don't need to be hammered with what you need to do. I don't think when people go to church, I know when I go to church, I don't need to be hammered with what I need to do. I already know more that I need to do. I don't need somebody telling me what I need to do, really. I think that's true with most of us. Are you doing everything now you know, so you need somebody to tell you what else you need to do? Right? How many of you, right? Most of you grew up in the church. You know the Bible. You've been studying the Bible. When you go to church, when I go to church at least, I want to hear something that's not what I need to do, but what's been done for me. And the done always precedes the do. Now, there is a place for do. There is a place for commands. Don't misunderstand me. Those commands are all valid. and they are good. In fact, once you begin to understand how good God is, you will understand how good His commandments are. That they are sweeter than honey, more precious than gold, as the psalmist says. But you will never understand how good His commandments are until you understand how good He is, the one who gave you the commandments. Do you know what the first commandment is? What's the first commandment? Well, that's the greatest. That's the greatest. I'm talking about the 10 commandments. Or the 10. What's the first one?
Love the gods before me.
You shall have no other gods before me. That's the first one, isn't it? In other words, no idolatry. There's one God and you put Him first, right? That's the first commandment. But that's not the way the commandments start. The commandments don't really begin with that sentence. This is the way the commandments start. Exodus chapter 20. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the house of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I am the Lord your God, who did this for you. You were slaves, and I delivered you. Now I'm saying, you shall have no other gods before me, before the God who delivered you, before the God who saved you. That's how they begin. See, that's the done. I have done this for you. I did this for you before I'm telling you what you need to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The done comes before the do. Look at Paul's epistles. Book of Romans, the first 11 chapters lay out Paul's understanding of divine redemption, of God's plan, and of His grace. Salvation by grace through faith, right? It's all there, the gift of the Spirit. And then he gets to, but he's telling you what God has done for you, and then he gets to chapter 12 and he says, therefore, because of everything God has done for you, therefore, present your bodies as living sacrifices to God, right? This is the do part. And he begins to talk about things we should do as a consequence of other. But you have to understand, if you don't understand what God has done for you, you're going to have that attitude I had as a young teenager. I wish there were no God, because he's a joy killer. You know, I wish there were no God. If you don't understand the done before the do. So I just wanted to say that as kind of introduction to this Trust and Obey conference. Now, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, the opposite of faith, of trust, which I call fear, insecurity, anxiety. Anybody experience that? Well, that's a rhetorical question, isn't it? The world is full of fear and anxiety, uncertainty. I've been a marriage counselor now for 40 years as well, because I started out teaching and did some campus ministry many years ago. And I've come to realize, not because of my own brilliance, but because the couples I work with have taught me, and other people have taught me, that one of the big problems even in a marriage is that conflict between couples and difficulties and estrangement between couples arises out of fear and insecurity. You see, when I got married, we have a hope that this person loves us and is going to be there for us, going to take care of us. And my wife had the same hope, but there are two dangers in getting close to somebody. And the two dangers are this, that if you get close to somebody, they can begin to make demands on you, and you can begin to feel controlled or pushed or smothered by this person. And I guarantee you there are some men in this room right now who feel that their wives are controlling and smothering. have to raise your hand, but I know there's some of you like that. That happens. And there's some wives who feel like this, you men are smothering and controlling them, taking control. And don't give any space for them. They they're going to lose their identity. And that's your fear, or that's your fear, or your anxiety. And then that leads to conflict. The other fear, the other side of that is that you can fear abandonment, that this person is there for you, and somehow or another they're not paying you enough attention. They're not talking to you enough. And some of you have got wives who will say, my husband is always involved in something else. He's never paying much attention to me. And some of you feel like your wife isn't there for you. You want sex more often. You want more affection, and you want more attention. And you feel like that she's supposed to care for you, and you're feeling uncared for and neglected. And you're afraid of losing something that you need. You're like a little child who's afraid of losing mom. That's the greatest fear a child has, being abandoned. Well, fear and anxiety lead to usually disastrous consequences. When our lives are based on fear, when you make a decision based on fear, it's usually not a very good decision. Peter was afraid there in the courtyard where Jesus was on trial. He made a decision when somebody said, aren't you one of the friends of Jesus? He made a decision, didn't he? The decision was, I better play this safe. I'll just tell him, no, I don't know Jesus. No, you got a little mistake there, right? It was based on fear, wasn't it? Based on fear. I'll just lay low. That's the first thing. When there's a lack of trust, a lack of faith, and I've got a little critter there who kind of illustrates that. When the turtle faces anxiety or fear or a threat, what does the turtle do? He pulls in, he hides, he withdraws, or he runs. That's what Peter was doing. He was trying to hide, wasn't he? Yeah. Now, there is another natural kind of reaction. And by the way, I might ought to say something to start with about fear and anxiety. There are people who suffer what's called clinical anxiety, and to some degree, anxiety is built in, or the ability to be anxious or fearful is built into us biologically. It's built into all animals. It occurs at the base of the brain, at that part of the brain. I forget the name of it, but it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't occur up here at these advanced parts of the brain, the forefront of your brain. The thinking and judging part, the part that's kind of unique to human beings. It occurs at what we call the reptilian level, the part of your brain that you share with the lizards and the snakes. But all animals, if they feel threatened, they have a defense response, don't they? Every one of them. The turtle, his defense response is what? He's going to hide. He's going to pull into his shell. By the way, talking about marriage, I was talking to a couple one time and we was talking about these relationships. And it's often where one spouse in the relationship is afraid of being controlled or smothered, and the other one is afraid of being abandoned or not getting enough attention. And then they get into a cycle. And the wife, in this case, was the one who was afraid of abandonment and wanted more attention, and the husband was afraid of being controlled. And we were talking about that one is a little bit like the turtle, and the one who's afraid of abandonment can get so aggressive, it can be like the skunk. They start spreading a lot of stink. And the woman laughed at this. She thought it was very funny. And I said, you really find this little analogy funny? She says, yes, because when I was a little girl, my parents gave me a little turtle. little pet turtle, in the box and brought it home. It was sitting there, and it just sat there. And I wanted to see a little action, so I prodded it a little bit, and it started to pull its head and its legs in. So she said, I tapped it with a pencil, and it pulled in more and more and more. So she said, then I went and got a hammer. You men ever been hammered before? Your wife trying to get your attention? It does happen, doesn't it? But that means, you're probably afraid of her attacking you, controlling you, smothering you, taking advantage of you in some way. But anyway, when you make a decision out of fear, that's because you're really being controlled by your basic animal instincts. Now, it's true, God gave us these instincts so that, when there's a lot of traffic, you don't walk right out in front of the truck because you're afraid of getting smashed, right? So your basic animal instincts do help you survive. They're very important. But when it comes to human relationships and when it comes to your relationship with God, just as Jesus felt these instincts, just as all of us did, didn't he? And he struggled with it. And if he had made his decisions based on his fear and insecurity, there would have been no salvation for us, would there? No. He wouldn't have put his life on the line for us. Any more than if a soldier on D-Day is getting out of a landing craft and walking up that beach at Normandy, and those German guns right up there on the top are just firing down at him, and the bullets hitting all around him, and his buddy getting his brains blown out. How do you think that guy feels? You don't think he's afraid? He feels it, doesn't he? But he does not go by his feet. He does not let that impulse to defend himself stop him from marching up the beach. By the way, what is courage? Definition of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. The absence of fear, particularly when somebody's shooting at you, the absence of fear is stupidity. Right? What is courage then? It's not just the absence of fear. Courage is fearing what you ought to fear. And what should you fear? The Bible says over and over again, fear not, doesn't it? So what? But fear not. But there is something you should fear, something you should dread. The psalmist says, Psalm 86. God says, I am the Holy One. I am the one you should fear. I am the one you should dread. And Jesus said, don't be afraid of those who can kill the body, and after that they can't do anything to you. Don't worry about that. Don't focus on that. The one you need to fear is the one who, after death, has the power to cast into hell, right? So courage is knowing what you should fear. The soldier who walks up the landing beach at Normandy, what is he afraid of? He is afraid of getting killed, of course. But he is also afraid of letting his buddies down. He's also afraid of shaming his company. He's also afraid of letting his country down. That's what he's afraid of. And that's what's called courage, because he knows what he should be afraid of. Do you know what you should be afraid of? Then that's what you call trust in God. Trust in God, faith in God is really courage when we are besieged by the anxieties and fears of life. Trust. And what does faith in God look like? Can we go over to the next, third slide, I think. Oh, by the way, there is a second slide. No. The one before that. This is the other response to anxiety and fear. One is to hide, and the other is just to get aggressive, right? Those are two responses, natural. They're very natural, fleshly responses to fear. But now, going over to the next slide. Well, we're not quite ready yet, but just leave that one up here. Just forget what it says. I want to make a few comments. How much more time we have? 3 minutes? Okay. Let me summarize this real quick. Faith's response to fear really, and trust, really means you just turn to God. It's the essence of prayer. First, you have to acknowledge your fear. You have to be aware, I am scared. Don't be afraid to acknowledge your fear. And then you just turn to God. You have to trust God. That's what it means to trust. Is to let Him know, Lord, I am scared to death. And there is no one to help but you. But finally, this was the last slide here. And real quick, I've got to finish this. That I want to say this, that obedience has a lot more to do with being rather than doing. If your heart isn't in it, it doesn't mean a thing to God. How much do you give to the church? It doesn't matter if your heart isn't in it. Whether you give $1 or whether you give $1,000. The Lord doesn't need your money. He wants your heart. He wants your heart. And if you know who He is, if you know how good He is, if you got the done before the do, you're going to be okay. Thank you, brothers.
Rock and roll, everybody. Let's hear it for him, guys. This is how the Holy Spirit works, y'all. Because, look, a New York guy saying y'all. Anyway, I needed to hear that. I don't know about y'all, but I really needed to hear what Bob just said. And I'll just quickly tell you why. I wrote a book in 2015 called Pain Was My Friend because I got hurt in a car accident when I was 19 and lived with it for 17 years with a horrible back injury. And I just this week, I kid you not, forgiven the guy who hit me in the car accident some 39 years ago. Wow. All right, just this week. And then 2 days later, Thursday, I got hit again from behind by another driver. So I had 2 days of peace from a 38-year-old trauma. So I'm honest when I tell you guys, I white-knuckled it the whole way here this morning. All right? I was just scared to be on the road. I'm not kidding you, okay? That guy ruined my life, and there it was. I got hit again in the back this week, okay? I was so afraid. I live in Punta Gorda. I drove all the way around to avoid the Skyway Bridge because I couldn't do it. Wow. I couldn't do it. I was shaking that bad as I was driving it. Okay? So I really needed to hear that. So, Bob, thank you so very, very much. Thank you. That was a powerful, powerful message. Both messages. They dovetailed to each other perfectly, didn't they? That's also how the Holy Spirit works. These guys didn't sit down today and work that out, that those two went hand in hand like that. They don't even like each other, those two guys. I saw them beat the heck out of each other outside before the thing. Guys, take it easy. And Bob was beating the heck out of him too. Bobby was going down. He was just pummeling Bob. It was just terrible. No, I'm kidding, of course. But again, they didn't sit down and confer before they did this, but look how well those two messages dovetail. So let's give the Holy Spirit a big shout.